Hey everybody, Gromos here with another DCS video. Now in my last DCS video I showed you a mission in the Mig-21 utilizing the plane's RSBN navigation system and Prng landing system in low visibility conditions, and I have to say this was for me a very fun mission to play, and I plan to incorporate elements like this more often in my DCS missions and videos in the future. But I also figure I make a few little guides to help players new to DCS and simulations like this with tasks like bad weather navigations and landing. So this time I got a short video which is intended as a little guide for new players on how to use the PRMG landing system on the Mig-21 or also the L-39 Albatros for landing in bad weather and low visibility conditions. Now, there are already quite a few videos on RSBN and PRMG systems out there explaining them quite well, so I won't make a basic RSBN video. What I found for fewer info and examples of is about using the PRMG system to land in no or next to no visibility conditions, however, and that is quite a bit different doing it while being able to see things like the runway or the ground, which everybody will automatically use as extra reference points. So I figure I make one on my own. Now, as I have said, this is a beginner's guide to this very specific task, using the PRMG system to land while not being able to see. So the information might be obvious to DCS players experienced with the PRMG or similar ILS systems in simulators or real planes. But being new to the simulator myself, I noticed that there are a few pitfalls that might make the task more difficult and confusing for new players that don't have prior experience with such a system. I hope I can help with that. Also, the video is about flying the approach yourself. There is also an autopilot mode that can fly the approach for you in the Mig-21bis, but what would the fun in that be? And the idea of the video is to learn doing it yourself, as not every plane will have an autopilot, and I hope we will be getting more planes that are equipped with the system in DCS in the future. Also, the PRMG system is not meant to be used completely without visibility. The actual touchdown is still meant to be flown with visual contact to the runway, so normally you should start to see the runway on short final when flying over the last marker at the latest, though it can still be fun to go a little bit further than that in a mission, and there are of course emergency situations you can simulate. For example, running low on fuel for some reason, where you might be forced to land anyway, even if you don't have visual contact to the runway when you overfly the latest marker. Though such landings where you don't see the runway until the very last second can be quite dicey, as you can see here. Still a fun and challenging scenario, but even when you see the runway from a little bit further out than that, getting close enough to do it without visibility can be difficult when unfamiliar with the system. So let's take a look at a few things you have to look out for. First, let's quickly go over the instruments, which we will use to do a landing with the PRMG system. Now on the left side of the palette you dial in the channels for the airport you want. The first one is for the RSBN navigation system and the second for the PRMG landing system. Those do not have to be the same, but in the Mig-21 simulation they often are. On the L-39 this panel is on the right side instead. Now, you can get the channels for the different airports from your kneeboard. Keep in mind that they not necessarily have to be the same on the L-39 and the Mig-21. If you get a signal, the green lights turn on and you can hear a Morse code identification signal of the station. The range is about 180 to 200 km and you can get the range to the beacon here. And this switch here lets you switch between the RSBN and ADI mode, and of course it needs to be in RSBN mode in this case. Now, the main instruments we need are the attitude direction indicator called KPP1 in the MiG and the course system called Npp. And for the sake of completion, also extremely important for landing a plane, especially the MiG in any circumstances, are the variometer showing your descent rate, airspeed indicator here, and barometric as well as radar altimeter here and here. The instrumentation on the L-39 is similar. If you know how they look in one plane, you should be able to find them in another without too much trouble. Now let's take a look at what we need on the KPP and the Npp. Since we are talking about landing using the PRMG landing system in this video, what we will be looking at the most are those two little bars on top and to the left of the KPP instrument. Those will show you the direction in which the glide path to the runway lies. The circle in the middle represents your plane. So if the little bar on top is to the left of it, the glide path to the runway is to the left of you, and depending on the circumstances, you may need to turn to the left to intercept the glide path. We talk about that more soon. Same for the one to the left. If it is below the circle, the glide path is below you and you need to descend. The Npp will give you the same information here, also indicated by a vertical and a horizontal bar, and works the same way than the one at the KPP, though combined in one, not just two different ones. Though I prefer to look at the ones at the KPP, that is just a personal preference. Now, so far so simple. Bar is to the right or to the left, turn right or left, and so forth. Well, once you actually try it, you will see it's not quite as simple as that if you don't actually see anything outside the plane. Now, this yellow needle in the KPP is the flight director needle. With this, the flight director shows you where he wants you to turn while navigating with the RSPN system. Again, very simple. If the needle points to the right, you turn to the right till it is centered again. Here we have a difference between the MiG and the L-39, by the way, because the MiG uses the flight director while navigating with the RSPN system, but not in PRMG landing mode. On the L-39 you can activate this flight director in landing mode too, and that helps quite a bit. Now, the Npp Course Instrument also shows a few other important information. Your heading, of course, indicated by this triangle. If it points at 18, your heading is 180 degrees. Now, there are two needles in the Npp. This one is showing the direction to the beacon. It will point straight at the RSPN station on the airfield. So if all you want to do is get there in a straight line, that is all you need. The second needle is the course needle, and you can adjust it with this knob. This one lets you tell the system what radial you want to fly on, and let's go quickly over what that means and why it is important in this case. Now, to give a quick example, here we want to land on the Maykop-Kanskaya airfield, here, and we are here. Now, from our point of view, the airfield is about heading 345 degrees, so if we fly that heading, we fly straight at the airfield. Here's the problem though, the runway is heading 39 degrees, so if we fly straight at the airfield from our current position, we can't land, as the runway would be almost perpendicular to our flight path, and since we can't see the airfield under the low-hanging clouds, we would not have time to correct this after breaking out of the clouds. So the runway is pointing 39 degrees, so we want to approach it flying toward heading 39 as well, so we fly straight at the runway, and when we break out of the clouds, we have it right in front of us. Now, the RSPN station on the airfield has, to simplify it a bit, 380 so-called radials going out in all compass directions. For example, east would be radial 90 and west radial 270, and so on. We can use the course needle on the Npp to set what radial we want to fly on, and the course director will direct us to intercept that radial. So the runway is 39 degrees. That means we want to approach the airfield on radial 219, the one going the other way, 39 plus 180. To make that easier though, I just dial in 39 degrees with the tail end of the needle. Now, if we take a look at the Npp, we can see that the needle pointing at the RSPN station, as you can see, is pointing to our right, yet the flight director needle is centered, directing us to fly straight ahead, because it wants us to intercept the 219 degree radial, as we have specified with our course needle. As we keep flying, the two needles move closer and closer together, and the flight director eventually directs us to start to turn right to intercept the radial. So when we finally reach the airfield and break out of the clouds, we have the runway in front of us and we are ready to touch down. Approaching from the correct heading is important in those conditions, as you can't see the runway for most of your approach, so you have to make sure you approach from the correct side, as you don't want to fly around the airfield in the clouds lining the runway up properly, and also to avoid possible obstacles like mountains and hills that could be left and right of the runway, though of course you should check for that beforehand. Well, let's talk about the actual PRMG landing now. The PRMG system has a range of between 20 and 25 kilometers from the airfield, and you have to have the runway within 45 degrees of your aircraft's nose approaching from the correct heading to get a signal. If you don't get a signal, two red flags will appear in the KPP instrument with a T and a K on it, indicating that there is no signal. So the basics are, you switch the PRMG system on about 25 kilometers out, about 1500 meters above ground, and you use the two bars in the KPP or Npp to intercept and stay on the glide path towards the runway. Again, if the vertical bar is to the left or right of the ring representing your aircraft, the glide path is to the left or right, and you have to turn that way. Same for the horizontal with up or down. Simple enough, and when you have some visibility, pretty easy to do. But when you don't have any visibility, there are a few things you have to keep in mind when you are not used to this system. Let's take a look at a typical mistake someone new to DCS and a system like this might make. That is, only using the bars to navigate without fully understanding what they try to tell you to do. Here's an example on how not to do it. We are approaching Batumi airfield and want to land with the PRMG system, as we don't have any visual contact to the airfield. As you can see, the bar on top is to the left. The glide path is to the left of our aircraft, so let's turn to the left and trace this bar down. As you can see, I bank to the left and turn after the bar, and after turning pretty tightly for a bit, the bar is suddenly moving to the right. And I stop my turn, but the bar, instead of staying centered, overshoots and keeps moving to the right at a fast pace. So, well, let's bank to the right and turn to the right, but now it's suddenly pointing to the left again. So I roll around yet again, change direction, and turn to the left yet again, trying to get that bar centered, but eventually I lose the signal completely. Well, this wasn't very pretty. Instead of a nice straight approach, we were turning in tight serpentines, left and right and back again, and then eventually lose the signal completely. So what went wrong? Aren't we supposed to turn left when the bar in the instrument is to the left and indicating that the glide path is to the left? Well, I assume though you can already guess what the problem is. Now, let's say we are here and the airfield is up there, and the glide path, as the instrument tells us, is a bit to our left. Now, the thing is though, unlike the flight director needle, those bars don't actually tell us which direction to turn. It just tells us if the flight path is to our left or to our right, or up and down. So if we just turn to the left, well, our nose is pointing at the flight path now, not at the airfield, and when we hit the glide path we overshoot as we fly in the wrong direction. If we then turn around to chase down the bar in the other direction, the same happens, and we fly a zigzag around the glide path. And if we keep turning, we have a good chance of getting out of the 45-degree arc and lose the signal, or in extreme cases even turn around and fly away from the runway. So looking just at those bars alone won't cut it. With good visibility this is not a problem, because you can see the runway and can therefore automatically interpret what the system actually wants you to do. Without visibility we need the Npp Course system and the extra information it provides to interpret the situation and what is actually to do. So let's do the same thing again, but this time do it right. Now again we can see that the glide path indicator is to our left, even more so than the last time, so the glide path is to our left. However, this time we not only look at those bars, but also at the Npp and the two needles. The RSBN needle that points straight at the beacon on the airfield, and the course needle we have set to approach Batumi on radial 126, which is the heading of the runway. And as you can see, they do not point to the left. As a matter of fact, they point a little bit to the right. Not a whole lot, they point almost straight ahead, but if you look closely you can see that the needle's tip is just a little bit to the right of the triangle. Yet the glide path is to our left. So why is that, and what does that tell us? Well, as the needles indicate, the airfield is in front of us and just slightly to the right of our own flight path. However, we are not approaching it perfectly on the runway heading. The airfield is pointing a bit more to the left, so the glide path is not perfectly parallel with our course, and that is why it ends up on our left, even though the airfield is more to the right. That is the information we get if we combine both the PRMG bars that indicate where the glide path is and the Npp needles. And with this information we also know that we don't really have to turn to the left. Even if the glide path is to our left at the moment, we can just fly straight and we will intercept the glide path eventually, and then we turn right to follow it towards the runway. The opposite of what you might think if you don't combine both indications into the full picture. If we would be closer and don't have time, we might have to turn to the left a bit and then do the right to get on the glide path faster, but in this case we are far enough out, and if you keep an eye on the vertical bar in the KPP or Npp, you will see it is slowly closing in as we get closer to the glide path. At the same time I also have to pay attention to the altitude and get on the vertical part of the glide path. Now eventually, when the bar closes in on the ring indicating my airplane, I get ready for a slight turn to the right, because the airfield is still a little offset to the right, and as soon as I reach the glide path, I turn right till the needle in the Npp points straight forward, and I therefore fly right at the airfield on the glide path. This is a bit finicky and it's easy to overshoot, so you have to keep an eye on it and make correction as necessary to stay on the glide path, both the vertical as well as the horizontal part of it. Staying on the glide path with the vertical and horizontal bars, as well as keeping speed and descent rate in check and extend gears and flaps at appropriate moments, is quite a bit to do and requires some concentration. I would strongly suggest to have hotkeys set up for gears, flaps, landing lights and whatever else you need during the landing attempt. In good visibility, it's not a problem to look away from the instruments a bit to use the mouse to get gears and flaps out, and it looks nice in a video doing that way. But with no visibility, you want to keep the instruments in sight and not have to look away from them. Both gear and flaps are positioned in such a way that the pilot in the MiG would not have to look at them either. Well, other than having to concentrate on instruments and interpreting the situation from them instead of just looking out the window, the approach is the same as it would be in good weather. I pretty much fly it like it says in the handbook of the module. At about 15 km I get the gear out and the full flaps shortly after that, slowly go down to about 350 kph with the flaps fully out, and then hold it there with the throttle. The descent rate you get, of course, from the glide path. That is for the Mig-21. You can look up the numbers for other planes like the L-39 in their handbook, and the way it says in the handbook is not the only way of doing it as well, of course. Well, by now we broke out of the clouds and have the runway of Batumi in front of us, and we can switch to visual approach, though I still use the glide path for the descent rate. Again, as it says in the handbook, I point my visible part of the nose at the close end of the runway as I approached, and then just keep an eye on speed and descent rate until we're above the runway. And as we're about to touch down, I flare, meaning pull up the nose to reduce the descent rate to almost nothing, the MiG doesn't like high descent rates, and then touch down and activate the drag chute, and that's the landing. Well, and this is it for this little bad weather PRMG guide. As I've said, I focused very much on the PRMG part of it, as I think there are already enough tutorials and training missions for normal landings out there. I hope I could explain a few things about it. Well, and this is also my first DCS tutorial. I might make more of them in the future. Let me know if you are interested in such a thing and what you would be interested in having a guide about if you are. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.